The day I found the second set of keys in my husband's briefcase, I knew something wasn't right. Thomas had always been meticulous, everything in its place, everything accounted for. That's how we'd lived for 50 years. So when those unfamiliar keys appeared, nestled beside a receipt from Callaway's Jewelers for a woman's bracelet I'd never received, I felt the first tremor of what would become an earthquake in my life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. For a woman of 72, I'd thought the days of earth-shattering revelations were behind me. I was wrong. "Thomas," I called out that evening, my voice steadier than my hands. "Would you come here for a moment?" He appeared in the doorway of our bedroom, reading glasses perched on his nose, the newspaper folded under his arm, the picture of domestic contentment. This man, my husband of 50 years, father to our daughter, grandfather to our precious Lucas, looked at me with the same blue eyes I'd fallen in love with when I was just 18. "What is it, Ellie?" he asked, so casually that for a moment I almost put the keys back where I found them. But I didn't. I held them up instead, letting them dangle from my finger. "I was putting your shirts away and found these. Are they for a new lock at the university office?" I saw it then, the flicker of panic in his eyes, quickly masked with practiced ease. "Oh, those. Yes, new office. Department changed the locks last week. Security measures." He reached for them, but I closed my hand around the metal. "That's funny, because they have an address tag on them. For the Willows condominiums." I watched his face drain of color. "Apartment 507. The silence between us stretched like a lifetime. I never imagined my golden years would begin with the discovery of a betrayal so profound it would erase everything I thought I knew about my life. In the days that followed my discovery of the keys, Thomas avoided coming home. His excuses varied. Late, faculty meetings, research emergencies, overnight conferences, but I knew. After 50 years with someone, you develop a sixth sense for their lies. I wish I could say I confronted him immediately, that I stormed to that apartment to see for myself what my husband had been hiding. But the truth is, I was afraid. Not just of what I might find, but of what it would mean for the carefully constructed world we'd built together. So instead, I waited. And while I waited, I remembered. I remembered being 18 and starry-eyed when I met Thomas Parker at the Riverdale Summer Festival. He was 21, home from college, handsome and articulate in a way that made all the local girls swoon. But he'd chosen me, simple Eleanor Mills, the shopkeeper's daughter. "You're different," he'd told me on our third date as we sat by the river watching fireflies dance. "You see the world in a way no one else does." What I didn't know then was that Thomas had just experienced a painful breakup with his high school girlfriend Patricia Williams, who had chosen college over him. I was the consolation prize, though it would take me half a century to realize it. We married young, just after Thomas completed his master's degree. I had dreams of attending nursing school, but when Thomas was offered a teaching position at Westlake University, those dreams were quietly folded away like winter clothes in summer. Instead, I became the perfect professor's wife, hosting dinner, parties, editing his manuscripts, raising our daughter Jessica on my own while he built his career. "Mom," Jessica would ask me sometimes, even as a young girl, "don't you want to do something for yourself?" And I would smile and say, "I am. I'm supporting your father's work. I'm raising you." It was the answer expected of women of my generation. After a week of avoidance, Thomas finally came home on a Friday evening, looking weary and older than his 75 years. "We need to talk, Ellie," he said, settling into his armchair, the one I'd reupholstered twice over the decades. "About the keys?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He nodded, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. "I should have told you sooner. I've been renting that apartment for the past 6 months. I sat very still, hands clasped in my lap to keep them from shaking. For what purpose, Thomas? His hesitation spoke volumes. I needed space to think, to work on my memoir without distractions. It was such a flimsy lie that I almost laughed. And this has nothing to do with Patricia Davis? Formerly Patricia Williams? The shock on his face was worth every moment of investigation I'd done in the past week. Every call made to old acquaintances from Riverdale. Every hour spent looking through Thomas's recent emails when he left his laptop open. How did you... Her husband Howard died 8 months ago. Quite suddenly, from what I understand. And miraculously, she reached out to you on social media shortly after. Quite the coincidence, isn't it? Thomas looked deflated, caught in a lie he hadn't prepared for. It wasn't planned, Ellie. She contacted me to let me know about Howard. We were all friends once, remember? And then we started talking and you decided to rent an apartment to meet with your high school sweetheart behind your wife's back. I finished for him. He didn't deny it. Instead, he had the audacity to look wounded. It's not what you think. We've been reconnecting as friends. She's been going through a difficult time. So difficult that you bought her a bracelet from Callaway's? I asked, pulling out the receipt I'd found with the keys. Thomas stood suddenly, his face flushed with anger. Have you been spying on me? The sheer hypocrisy of his indignation sparked something in me, a rage I hadn't felt in decades. No, Thomas. I've been discovering that my husband of 50 years has been lying to me. There's a difference. His next words came out in a rush, as if he'd been rehearsing them. Ellie, I want a divorce. Patricia and I have reconnected, and we want to spend whatever time we have left together. Just like that. 50 years, dismissed in a single sentence. I felt my world tilt sideways, the room spinning around me. Is this some kind of joke? I whispered. I'm sorry, Ellie. I never meant to hurt you, but Patricia and we have something special, something we lost all those years ago when her parents forced her to go to college across the country. We've always wondered what might have been. And what about what was? I asked, my voice rising. What about our 50 years together? What about Jessica? What about Lucas? Jessica is a grown woman with her own family, Thomas said dismissively. She'll understand. As for Lucas, I'll always be his grandfather. I stared at this stranger wearing my husband's face. You've already made up your mind, I realized. He nodded, having the grace to look somewhat ashamed. I'm flying to Phoenix next week to help Patricia pack her things. She's moving back to Oak Ridge. We've actually bought a house together. The Willows was just temporary. Bought a house? With what money? The implications hit me like a physical blow. Our retirement savings. Our investments. The nest egg we'd built together over decades. Ellie, be reasonable. I'll make sure you're taken care of. You can keep living here for now, until we sort things out officially. How generous of you, I said, the words bitter on my tongue. To allow me to stay in my own home. Thomas sighed, gathering his coat. I think I should stay at the apartment tonight. Give you some space to process this. Process this? I repeated, incredulous. You want me to process the fact that you've been planning a new life with another woman while I've been here thinking we were building our retirement together. I never meant for it to happen this way, he said softly. But when Patricia came back into my life, I realized I've been living with regret all these years. Don't you want me to be happy, Ellie? I couldn't answer him. How do you respond to someone asking if you want them to be happy when they've just destroyed your happiness without a second thought? After he left, I sat alone in our living room, surrounded by the artifacts of our shared life. The photos on the mantel chronicling birthdays, holidays, graduations. The souvenirs from trips we'd taken. the quilt his mother had made for our wedding. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 50 years of memories, and Thomas had decided they weren't enough. My phone rang around midnight. It was Jessica. "Mom, Dad just called me. Is everything okay?" Her voice was tinged with concern, but something else too. A strange hesitancy. "Your father has asked for a divorce," I said, finding it surreal to speak the words aloud. "He's reconnected with an old girlfriend from high school." The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, Jessica sighed. "I know. Mom, he told me last month." The betrayal cut deeper than I expected. "You knew? And you didn't think to tell me?" "Dad asked me not to. He said he needed time to figure out how to tell you himself." Jessica's voice took on a defensive edge. "Besides, he said you two had grown apart years ago, that you were basically just roommates." "That's not true," I protested, though even as I said it, I wondered. Had we grown that distant without my noticing? Had I been so focused on creating the perfect life for Thomas that I'd failed to see he was drifting away? "Mom, maybe this is for the best," Jessica continued, her tone gentle but firm. "Dad seems really happy with Patricia. I've met her a few times now, and she's actually quite nice." "You've met her?" The hits kept coming. "When? How many times?" Jessica hesitated again. "A few times over the past couple of months. Dad wanted me to get to know her before everything went public." She paused before adding, "Lucas loves her. She bakes with him. My own grandson, my daughter. They'd already welcomed this woman into the family while I remained in the dark." "I see," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Well, I'm glad everyone's been having such a lovely time getting acquainted behind my back." "Mom, don't be like that. This is hard for all of us." Jessica sounded tired. "Look, Stephen and I are coming over tomorrow. We can talk more then." After hanging up, I moved through the house like a ghost, touching objects, memories materializing and dissolving with each step. In our bedroom, no, my bedroom now, I opened Thomas's closet to find it half empty. He'd been moving out gradually, and I hadn't even noticed. I sat on the edge of our bed, the bed we'd shared for decades, and finally allowed the tears to come, not just for the betrayal, but for my own blindness. How had I missed the signs? How had I not seen that my husband was planning an escape from our life together? Morning came with brutal brightness, forcing me to face the new reality of my life. I showered and dressed with mechanical precision, then made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. Around noon, Jessica arrived with Stephen and Lucas. My grandson ran to me, throwing his arms around my waist. "Grandma, guess what? I'm going to have 2 grandmas. Now, isn't that cool?" The innocent cruelty of children. I forced a smile and hugged him tight. "Very cool, sweetheart." Jessica shot me an apologetic look before sending Lucas to play in the backyard. She and Stephen sat across from me at the kitchen table, their expressions a mix of concern and discomfort. "Mom, how are you holding up?" Jessica asked, reaching for my hand. I withdrew it gently. "I'm still processing the fact that my entire family has been lying to me for months." Stephen cleared his throat. "Mrs. Parker, Ellie, we didn't mean to hurt you. Thomas asked us to give him time, and we thought it was the right thing to do." "The right thing," I repeated. "Is that what you call excluding me from decisions about my own life? About my own marriage?" Jessica leaned forward. "Mom, you have to understand. Dad wasn't happy. He tried to talk to you about it many times over the years, but you never seemed to hear him." "What are you talking about?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Remember when he suggested the 2 of you should travel more after retirement? Or take those cooking classes together? Or when he wanted to move to a smaller place in the city? You always said no, that you were comfortable with things as they were. I stared at my daughter, trying to reconcile her words with my memories. Yes, Thomas had mentioned those things, but they had seemed like passing fancies, not deep desires. Had I really been so dismissive? That doesn't justify what he's done, I said finally. No, it doesn't, Jessica agreed. But Dad says he and Patricia have a connection that he and you never had. They share interests, passions. They want the same things out of life. After 50 years, he suddenly decided we have nothing in common? The absurdity of it struck me anew. Jessica sighed. Mom, I love you. But you have to admit, you and Dad have been living separate lives for years. He's been writing books, giving lectures, staying active in academic circles. And I've been the dutiful wife at home, I finished for her. Is that it? I'm boring? Too domestic? Not intellectual enough for the great Professor Parker? That's not what I meant, Jessica backpedaled. Just that. Maybe this could be an opportunity for you too, to find out who you are outside of being Dad's wife. I stood abruptly, unable to sit still any longer. I'm 72 years old, Jessica. I don't need to find myself. I know exactly who I am. I'm the woman who gave up her own dreams so your father could pursue his. I'm the woman who raised you while he was off at conferences and book tours. I'm the woman who kept this family together for half a century while he got to be the interesting one, the accomplished one. My voice broke on the last words, and I turned away, unwilling to let them see my tears. Behind me, I heard Stephen murmur something to Jessica before the back door opened and closed. He'd gone to check on Lucas. Jessica's arms came around me from behind. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. But Dad has made up his mind. He and Patricia are already planning their life together. I straightened my shoulders and turned to face my daughter. And what about my life? What am I supposed to do now? She had no answer for that. After they left, I sat in the growing darkness, replaying conversations from the past decades, looking for clues I might have missed. Had Thomas been unhappy all this time? Had I been so absorbed in supporting his dreams that I'd failed to see he'd developed new ones that didn't include me? My phone pinged with a text message. It was from Eleanor Robinson, my closest friend since moving to Oak Ridge. Heard the news. Coming over with wine and chocolate. No arguments. 20 minutes later, Eleanor was at my door, armed as promised with a bottle of Merlot and a box of truffles. At 70, she was a widow of 5 years, her husband having succumbed to cancer after a long battle. She'd reinvented herself afterward, opening a small bookshop downtown that had become a community hub. Oh, Ellie, she sighed, pulling me into a hug. What a mess. We settled in the living room, wine glasses in hand. I told her everything. The keys, the confrontation, Jessica's revelation. Eleanor listened without interruption, her face growing increasingly outraged. When I finished, she shook her head in disgust. That self-important jackass, she muttered. After everything you've done for him. Apparently, I wasn't stimulating enough, I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Not like Patricia with her literature degree and her published poetry. Bull, Eleanor declared firmly. This isn't about intellectual compatibility. It's about a man having a midlife crisis at 75. Despite everything, I laughed. Is it still considered midlife at that age? For Thomas? Yes. His ego has always been 20 years younger than the rest of him. Eleanor refilled our glasses. The question is, what are you going to do now? I sighed, sinking deeper into the couch. I don't know. Thomas says I can stay in the house. For now, whatever that means. Jessica thinks I should see this as an opportunity to find myself. Eleanor snorted. Of course she does. The younger generation thinks self-discovery solves everything. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. But here's what they don't understand, Ellie. We already know who we are. We've lived too long not to. The question isn't who you are, it's what you're going to do about it. Her words resonated, cutting through the fog of shock and hurt. What does that mean practically? It means you fight, Eleanor said simply. Not to get Thomas back. Frankly, he doesn't deserve you, but to get what's rightfully yours. 50 years of marriage means you're entitled to half of everything. The house, the savings, his pension. Don't let him push you into accepting less, just because he's having a geriatric romance. I hadn't even thought about the financial implications yet. Thomas had always handled our money. Another way I'd supported his career by taking care of the little things like household management. I wouldn't even know where to start, I admitted. Eleanor pulled out her phone. I'll text you Victor Steinman's number. Best divorce attorney in 3 counties. Harold used him for his business matters before he died, and the man is brilliant. Ruthless, but brilliant. The thought of lawyers and courts made my stomach clench. I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of fight. You don't have to decide tonight, Eleanor said gently. But promise me you won't sign anything Thomas gives you without talking to a lawyer first. Men like him count on women like you to be reasonable, to not want to make waves. Don't give him that satisfaction. After Eleanor left, I wandered through the house again, this time with new eyes. If Thomas and I divorced, what would happen to this place? Would I have to move? Where would I go? What would I live on? For the first time, the reality of my situation began to sink in. I hadn't worked outside the home since before Jessica was born. My name was on our accounts and property, but I'd never paid much attention to our finances. I'd trusted Thomas completely. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Eleanor had said, that this wasn't about finding myself, but about what I was going to do next. As dawn broke, I made a decision. I would see this apartment for myself. I needed to understand what had drawn Thomas away from our life together. The Willows was an upscale condominium complex in downtown Oak Ridge, all glass and steel and modern. Angles. Nothing like our traditional colonial home. I sat in my car across the street for nearly an hour, gathering my courage. Finally, I took the keys I'd found in Thomas's briefcase and entered the building. The lobby was sleek and minimalist, with a young concierge who barely glanced at me as I walked to the elevator. Apartment 507 was at the end of a long hallway. My hand trembled as I inserted the key into the lock, part of me still hoping this was all some terrible misunderstanding. The door swung open to reveal an apartment that couldn't have been more different from our home. The space was open concept, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Modern furniture in muted tones, abstract art on the walls, a state-of-the-art kitchen with appliances still shiny with newness. On the coffee table sat framed photographs, Thomas and Patricia at some outdoor event, both laughing. Patricia with her arm around Lucas. And most shocking of all, a group photo of Thomas, Patricia, Jessica, Stephen, and Lucas, all smiling at the camera like the perfect family, a family that didn't include me. I moved through the apartment like a detective, looking for clues to understand this betrayal. In the bedroom, Patricia's clothes hung in the closet alongside Thomas's missing items. On the nightstand, a worn copy of poetry, Keats, Thomas's favorite, with margin notes in 2 different handwritings, carrying on a conversation across the pages. On the dresser, a jewelry box sat open, displaying the bracelet from Callaway's, a delicate silver chain with a heart pendant. Beside it lay a card in Thomas's handwriting. To my Patty, for the second chance I never thought we'd have. All my love, Tom. Tom, not Thomas. He'd always corrected me when I tried to call him that, insisting it sounded too informal for a professor. I sank onto the edge of the bed, holding the card. 50 years of marriage, and I'd never known my husband. At all. A key turned in the lock of the apartment. "Tom?" A woman's voice called out. "Are you home early? I brought lunch from that Thai place you love." I froze, the card still in my hand, as Patricia Davis walked into the bedroom and saw me sitting there. She was beautiful, silver hair styled in a fashionable bob, slim figure dressed in casual elegance, the kind of woman who aged like fine wine. I recognized her immediately from the photographs, but seeing her in person made the situation undeniably, painfully real. Patricia's hand flew to her throat. "Oh, you must be Eleanor." The fact that she knew who I was while I had been kept in the dark about her very existence felt like a fresh wound. "Yes," I said, rising to my feet. "And you're Patricia." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "This isn't how I wanted us to meet." "And how exactly did you want us to meet?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "At the divorce proceedings? Or perhaps after you'd already married my husband?" Patricia set down the takeout bag she was carrying and straightened her shoulders. "I understand you're upset, and you have every right to be. But Tom and I—" "His name is Thomas," I interrupted. "Only his mother ever called him Tom." A flicker of surprise crossed her face. "He's always been Tom to me." Of course he had. Because with her, he could be someone else entirely. Someone I'd never been allowed to know. "I should go," I said, suddenly unable to bear another moment in that apartment, with its evidence of a life being built on the ruins of mine. "Wait," Patricia said, stepping forward. "Please, I know this must be painful for you, but Thomas, wanted to do this the right way. He cares about you, Eleanor. He always has." I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. "Is that why he's been lying to me for months? Why he's been moving his things out bit by bit, hoping I wouldn't notice? Why he introduced you to my daughter and grandson before I even knew you existed?" Patricia had the grace to look ashamed. "That wasn't my idea. I wanted him to be honest with you from the beginning." "How noble of you," I said. "And when did the beginning happen exactly? When Howard's body was still warm?" Her face paled. "That's not fair. Howard and I had been growing apart for years before he died, and Thomas and I reconnected by chance. We weren't looking for this to happen." I held up the card I'd found with the bracelet. "Really? Because this doesn't sound like something that just happened. This sounds like something you both wanted very much." Patricia sighed, her shoulders slumping. "What do you want me to say, Eleanor? That I'm sorry?" "I am. That I feel guilty?" "I do. But I also love him. I've loved him since we were teenagers." "And I've loved him for 50 years, I countered. "I've built a life with him. I gave up everything. For him. My education, my career prospects, my identity outside of being his wife. And now you come along, with your poetry and your stylish haircut and your history with him, and suddenly those 50 years mean nothing." "They don't mean nothing," Patricia insisted. "But people change, Eleanor. They grow apart. They realize they want different things. And Thomas decided he wanted you." "It wasn't a question," she nodded slowly. "And I wanted him. I'm not going to apologize for that part." I looked around the apartment one last time, taking in the evidence of the new life Thomas was already building without me. "Tell him I was here," I said finally. "Tell him I know everything now." As I turned to leave, Patricia called after me. "He does care about you, Eleanor. He wants to make sure you're taken care of." I paused at the door. I've spent my entire adult life taking care of Thomas. It's time I learned to take care of myself. With that, I walked out, leaving behind the physical proof of my husband's betrayal. But I carried something with me as I left, a growing certainty that I deserved better than what Thomas was offering, a reluctant settlement, a quiet dismissal after 50 years of devotion. As I drove home, Eleanor's words echoed in my mind. The question isn't who you are, it's what you're going to do about it. For the first time since finding those keys, I felt something other than shock and hurt. I felt anger, and beneath that anger, something even more powerful, determination. Thomas Parker was about to discover that the dutiful, accommodating wife he'd taken for granted all these years had finally reached her limit. And I was about to discover just how strong I could be at 72. I kept thinking about my past. As I drove home from the Willows, memories washing over me like waves. The anger that had ignited during my conversation with Patricia was now fueling something else, a desire to reclaim pieces of myself I'd forgotten existed. When Thomas and I first met in Riverdale all those years ago, I was known for my resilience. My father, who ran the town's only hardware store, often said I had more determination in my little finger than most people had in their entire bodies. I'd been planning to attend nursing school, had even secured a partial scholarship. The local hospital administrator had written me a glowing recommendation. You have a real gift for healing, Eleanor, he'd told me. A natural compassion that can't be taught. But then Thomas came into my life with his ambitious plans and brilliant mind. I still remember the night he proposed, a warm summer evening under a canopy of stars. We were sitting on the hood of his father's borrowed Buick, sharing dreams of the future. I'm going to be the youngest full professor in the history of the university, he'd declared. And then I'll write books that change how people think about American history. And I'll be a nurse, I'd added, squeezing his hand. Maybe work at the university hospital. His hesitation should have been my first warning. About that, Ellie, he'd said, turning to face me. Being a professor's wife is a demanding role. Faculty functions, dinner parties, supporting my research. And of course, once we have children. I could work part-time, I'd suggested. Lots of women do both now. Thomas had smiled indulgently. My mother always said a family needs one person fully devoted to making it work. Besides, you'd be helping me achieve things that benefit both of us. My success would be our success. Looking back now, I could see how skillfully he'd redirected my ambitions into supporting his. How he'd framed my sacrifice as a contribution rather than a surrender. And I'd accepted it, even embraced it, because that's what women of my generation were taught to do. The house was quiet when I returned from my confrontation with Patricia. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, leafing through old photo albums I'd pulled from the bookshelf. There I was, 22 and radiant in my wedding dress. There was Thomas, arm around my waist, looking at the camera rather than at me. Page after page documented our life together. The birth of Jessica, family vacations, holidays, Thomas's award ceremonies. In almost every photo, I was slightly to the side, smiling proudly at my husband or daughter rather than claiming the spotlight for myself. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my reverie. I opened it to find Thomas standing there, his expression a mixture of anger and concern. Patricia called me, he said without preamble. What were you thinking, going to the apartment like that? I stepped back to allow him inside, noting how he hesitated before entering what had been his home for decades. I was thinking I deserved to see what my husband has been hiding from me. Thomas ran a hand through his silver hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache despite everything. You had no right to go through our things. Our things? I repeated, incredulous. You mean the secret life you've been building while still married to me? I had every right, Thomas. Every legal and moral right. He sank into his usual armchair, another habit so ingrained he probably didn't even realize he was doing it. This isn't how I wanted things to go, Ellie. I had a plan for how to tell you, how to make the transition smooth for everyone. How considerate of you, I said, unable to keep the sarcasm from my voice. And did this plan include introducing Patricia to our family behind my back? Having her meet our grandson while I remained clueless? Thomas at least had the decency to look ashamed. Jessica thought it would be better that way, less confrontational. Less confrontational for whom? I demanded. Certainly not for me. Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to learn that my own daughter has been complicit in this deception? It wasn't deception, Thomas insisted. It was discretion. While I figured out the right way to tell you. I laughed bitterly. After 50 years together, you couldn't find the courage to tell me the truth? You had to sneak around like a teenager? I didn't want to hurt you, he said, his voice soft. And yet, here we are. I sat across from him, studying the face. I'd woken up to for half a century. Why, Thomas? Why now, after all this time? He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. Finally, he sighed. When Howard died and Patricia reached out, it was just to reconnect as old friends. But then we started talking, really talking about books and ideas and dreams we still had. And I realized I'd been missing that kind of connection for years. The word stung, but I kept my expression neutral. We talk. About practical things, Thomas said. About Jessica and Lucas, about house repairs and bills and what to have for dinner. When was the last time we discussed a book we'd both read? Or debated a political idea? Or made plans for something exciting? I wanted to argue, to list all the meaningful conversations we'd had over the years. But the truth was, I couldn't. Immediately recall examples that weren't related to family logistics or his career. So this is my fault? I asked instead. Because I'm not intellectual enough for you? Thomas shook his head. It's not about fault, Ellie. People grow and change. Sometimes they grow apart. Patricia and I, we connect on a level that you and I never did. And that justifies betraying 50 years of marriage? He looked down at his hands. I didn't set out to betray you. It just happened. And once I realized what I'd been missing all these years, I couldn't go back to pretending I was satisfied. Satisfied, I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. Was anything about our life together real, Thomas? Or have you been settling all along, waiting for Patricia to become available again? Of course it was real, he insisted. We built a good life together, Ellie. We raised a wonderful daughter, but people can have more than one true connection in their lives. I looked at him, this man I'd devoted my entire adult life to, and felt a strange detachment. And what happens now? You ride off into the sunset with Patricia while I… What? Fade quietly into the background? Thomas leaned forward, his expression earnest. I told you I'll make sure you're taken care of. The house needs some work, but you can stay here until we sell it. I'll give you enough to live comfortably. Give me? The word ignited fresh anger. You'll give me a portion of what we built together? How magnanimous of you. Be reasonable, Ellie, Thomas said, his tone suddenly professorial, the one he used when explaining something he considered obvious. Most of our assets are tied to my career, my pension, my investments, my book royalties. Our assets? I corrected. I may not have earned the money, Thomas, but I made it possible for you to have your career. Who raised our child while you were at conferences? Who edited your manuscripts? Who hosted dinner parties for your colleagues in department? Heads? Who managed our home so you could focus entirely on your work? Thomas's expression hardened. I've always acknowledged your support, Ellie. But let's be realistic about the financial situation. We need to divide things fairly. Fairly? I echoed. And what's your definition of fair? I was thinking you could keep most of the furniture and personal items, he said, as if offering a generous concession. And I'd provide monthly support, say $2,000. That should cover your basic needs. The casual way he suggested this arrangement, as if tossing me aside with a pittance after 50 years, stoked something primal inside me. Without fully intending to, I found myself reaching for the photo album on the coffee table and hurling it across the room. "Get out," I said, my voice deadly quiet. Thomas stared at me, shock evident on his face. "Ellie, calm down. We need to discuss this rationally." "There's nothing rational about how you've treated me," I said, standing up. "You've lied to me, betrayed me, and now you want to discard me with a monthly allowance? Get out of my house." "Thomas, my lawyer will be in touch." "Your lawyer?" He looked genuinely surprised. "Ellie, we don't need to involve lawyers. We can work this out between ourselves." I laughed, the sound harsh even to my own ears. "Like you worked out your relationship with Patricia? Behind my back? No, thank you. Now please leave before I say something we'll both regret." After a moment of tense silence, Thomas stood and walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned back. "I never meant to hurt you, Ellie. I hope someday you'll understand that." As the door closed behind him, I sank back onto the couch, trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. The rage was empowering, but the fear was paralyzing. What did I know about divorce proceedings, about financial negotiations, about living alone after 50 years of marriage? My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "How are you holding up?" I typed back, "I need that lawyer's number." The next morning, I sat in Victor Steinman's office, a sleek space in downtown Oak Ridge that spoke of success and competence. The man himself was in his 50s, with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that I found immediately reassuring. "Mrs. Parker," he said, reviewing the notes he'd taken during our conversation, "let me be direct. Based on what you've told me, you have a very strong case for an equitable division of assets. 50 years of marriage, your contributions as a homemaker and support to your husband's career, his deception regarding this, relationship with Mrs. Davis. These are all factors that work in your favor." "Thomas seems to think otherwise," I said. "He's acting as if most of our assets are rightfully his because he earned the income." Steinman shook his head. "That's a common misconception, and one that unfortunately many men of your husband's generation cling to. The law recognizes the value of non-monetary contributions to a marriage. Your work in the home, raising your daughter, supporting his career, these have tangible value." "He offered me $2,000 a month," I said, still stunned by the inadequacy of the proposal. "Completely insufficient," Steinman declared. "Especially considering his pension alone is likely substantial after his years as a tenured professor. Then, there's the equity in your home, investments, savings, and potentially his book royalties, depending on when they were written." For the next hour, Steinman outlined what a fair settlement might look like. Half of all marital assets, a portion of Thomas's pension, possibly alimony depending on various factors. The numbers he mentioned made my head spin. "I had no idea," I admitted. "Thomas always handled our finances. I know we're comfortable, but I don't know details about investments or exact figures." "That's also very common," Steinman assured me. "But don't worry. We'll file for full financial disclosure, and I'll bring in a forensic accountant if necessary. Your husband won't be able to hide assets." As I left his office, I felt a curious mixture of relief and trepidation. On one hand, I was reassured that the law would protect me from being cast aside with nothing. On the other hand, I was embarking on what promised to be a painful, possibly lengthy legal battle against the man I had loved for most of my life. When I arrived home, Jessica's car was in the driveway. I steeled myself for another difficult conversation as I entered the house. She was sitting at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a coffee mug, looking younger and more vulnerable than I'd seen her in years. "Mom," she said, rising as I entered. "Where have you been? I've been calling you." "I had an appointment," I said, setting down my purse. "With a divorce attorney." Jessica's face fell. Oh, Mom, is that really necessary? Dad said he tried to talk to you reasonably, but you got upset and threw things. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that Jessica was caught in the middle of a situation not of her making, even if she had contributed to the deception. Your father offered me $2,000 a month and suggested I could stay in this house until he decides to sell it, I said evenly. After 50 years of marriage, does that sound reasonable to you? Jessica blinked, clearly taken aback. He told me he was going to be generous. Generous by whose standards? I asked, pouring myself a cup of coffee. He's been planning this for months, Jessica. Meeting with Patricia, buying property with her, introducing her to you and Lucas. All while I remained completely in the dark. And now he expects me to quietly accept whatever crumbs he's willing to offer. My daughter had the grace to look ashamed. I didn't know he was going to offer so little. That doesn't seem right. No, it doesn't, I agreed. Which is why I've retained legal counsel. Jessica sighed, running a hand through her hair, a gesture so like her father's it made my heart twinge. I hate that it's come to this. Legal battles, dividing assets. It's all so ugly. Yes, it is, I said, sitting across from her. But I didn't create this situation, Jessica. Your father did, and you helped him. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Mom, No, let me finish, I said firmly. I understand that you love your father and want him to be happy. But did you ever stop to consider my happiness? Did you ever think about how devastating it would be for me to learn that my entire family had been keeping secrets from me? Tears filled Jessica's eyes. I'm sorry, Mom. Dad made it sound like you'd understand. Like your marriage had been over in all but name for years. And you believed him, I said, the hurt evident in my voice. He's my father, she said simply, as if that explained everything. And he seemed so happy with Patricia. Happier than I'd seen him in years. More alive. More engaged. I nodded slowly, absorbing the painful truth that my husband had come alive for another woman in ways he never had for me. And you thought I should just accept that? Step aside gracefully? Jessica wiped away a tear. I didn't think about it deeply enough. Dad said he'd take care of you, and I believed him. I was so caught up in how nice it was to see him excited about life again that I didn't consider the full impact on you. For the first time since this ordeal began, I saw genuine remorse in my daughter's eyes. Not just discomfort or embarrassment, but true regret. I made a mistake, Mom, she continued. A terrible mistake. I should have told you what was happening. I should have stood up for you. I reached across the table and took her hand. Yes, you should have. But what's done is done. Now we have to figure out how to move forward. What can I do? She asked, squeezing my hand. How can I make this right? For starters, you can stop acting as your father's messenger, I said. And you can respect my decision to protect myself legally. Jessica nodded. Of course. And I want you to know, if Dad really did offer you such an unfair settlement, I don't support that. Not at all. It wasn't a complete healing of the breach between us, but it was a start. As Jessica prepared to leave, she hesitated at the door. Lucas keeps asking about you, she said. He misses his grandma. Would it be okay if I brought him by this weekend? The mention of my grandson brought a genuine smile to my face for the first time in days. I'd love that. Maybe we could bake cookies together. After Jessica left, I wandered through the house that had been my home for decades, seeing it with new eyes. How much of this space had I actually shaped according to my own preferences? The formal living room was decorated in the traditional style Thomas preferred. The study was entirely his domain. Even the kitchen, ostensibly my territory, had been updated 10 years ago with appliances and finishes Thomas had selected. The only space that felt truly mine was the small sunroom at the back of the house, where I kept my plants in a comfortable reading chair. It was where I retreated when Thomas was working or when faculty wives were visiting, and the conversation turned to topics where I felt out of my depth. As I stood in that sunroom now, surrounded by the greenery I'd nurtured, I realized how symbolic it was. I'd literally confined myself to the smallest room in the house, making myself small to accommodate Thomas's larger presence. "Not anymore," I whispered to the empty room. That night, I pulled out a dusty box from the back of my closet, memorabilia I'd saved from before my marriage. Inside were acceptance letters to nursing schools, including the one I'd planned to attend, awards from high school science competitions, a journal filled with dreams and ambitions that had nothing to do with being someone's wife. I'd been someone before I was Mrs. Thomas Parker. Maybe it was time to rediscover that person. The next morning, I called Eleanor. "Can we meet for coffee? I need your advice about something." 2 hours later, we sat at a table in her bookshop, coffee and books, during a quiet period between customers. "So you've spoken to Steinman," Eleanor said. "Good. He'll make sure Thomas doesn't railroad you." "Yes, but it's not just about the legal aspects," I explained. "It's about what happens after. Thomas and I were supposed to grow old together, enjoy our retirement years. Now all those plans are gone, and I'm not sure what to replace them with." Eleanor studied me over the rim of her coffee cup. "What did you want to be before you met Thomas? Before you became defined by your role as his wife?" "A nurse," I said without hesitation. "I wanted to help people, to make a difference." "It's not too late for that, you know," Eleanor said. "Maybe not nursing specifically, but there are plenty of ways to care for others." I laughed softly. "I'm 72, Eleanor. I'm not going to start a new career now." "Who said anything?" "About a career?" she countered. "There's volunteer work, community service. The hospital always needs people to rock premature babies or provide comfort to patients without family nearby." The thought sparked something inside me, a flicker of the passion I'd once felt for healing work. I hadn't considered that. "Or," Eleanor continued, warming to the topic, "you could volunteer here at the shop. I've been thinking about starting a reading program for seniors at the assisted living facility down the street. Someone with your empathy would be perfect for it." For the first time since finding those keys in Thomas's briefcase, I felt a glimmer of possibility, of a future that wasn't defined by loss and betrayal, but by new beginnings. "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "Good," Eleanor said firmly. "Because while Steinman handles the legal battle, you need to focus on building a life that has nothing to do with Thomas Parker." Over the next few days, I threw myself into researching volunteer opportunities. The hospital did indeed have a program for holding infants in the NICU. The local literacy council needed tutors for their adult education classes. The community garden was looking for people with knowledge of plants to mentor newcomers. Each possibility made me feel more alive, more connected to the person I'd been before I surrendered my identity to being a professor's wife. On Saturday, Jessica brought Lucas over as promised. My grandson ran into my arms with the uninhibited enthusiasm of a 7-year-old. "Grandma, Mom says we're making cookies today." I hugged him tightly, savoring his warmth and innocence. "That's right, sweetie. What kind should we make?" "Chocolate chip? With extra chips," he declared. As we worked together in the kitchen, Lucas perched on a stool helping me measure ingredients. He suddenly asked, "Grandma, are you and Grandpa getting a divorce like Molly's parents at school?" The question caught me off guard. I glanced at Jessica, who was sitting at the kitchen table, her expression a mix of concern and guilt. "Yes, Lucas," I said gently. "Grandpa and I are getting a divorce." He frowned, his small face serious. "Is it because of Grandma Patty?" "Grandma Patty?" I repeated, the title sending a shaft of pain through my chest. Jessica winced. Dad and Patricia have been telling him to call her that. I should have mentioned it to you. I'm sorry. I took a deep breath, determined not to let my hurt show in front of Lucas. It's complicated, sweetie. Sometimes adults grow apart and decide they'd be happier living separately. Lucas considered this, his head tilted to one side. But you won't stop being my grandma, right? Never, I assured him, pulling him into another hug. I will always be your grandma, and I will always love you. That will never, ever change. He seemed satisfied with this answer and returned his attention to the cookie dough. After he'd gone to wash his hands, Jessica approached me, her expression apologetic. I should have told you they were having him call her that, she said. I didn't think about how hurtful it would be. There seem to be a lot of things you didn't think about, I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Jessica flinched. You're right. I've been thoughtless and selfish. But I want you to know I'm on your side now, Mom. 100%. I nodded, acknowledging her words without fully accepting them yet. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. After they left, I found myself restless, the house too quiet, too full of memories. On impulse, I decided to drive downtown to Eleanor's bookshop. It was nearly closing time when I arrived, but the open sign was still lit. Eleanor looked up from the register as I entered, her face brightening. Ellie, what a lovely surprise. I hope I'm not interrupting, I said, glancing around the cozy space with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and comfortable reading nooks. Not at all. Just finishing up the day's receipts. Make yourself comfortable. I wandered among the shelves, breathing in the comforting smell of books, paper and ink and possibility. In the literature section, I paused in front of a display of modern poetry. One volume caught my eye, the latest work by a poet Thomas often quoted in his lectures. Without thinking, I picked it up and began to read. The words flowed through me, stirring emotions I hadn't allowed myself to feel in days. Grief, rage, fear, but also hope, resilience, possibility. That's one of my favorites, Eleanor said, appearing at my side. Martha Collins has a way of capturing the complexity of human relationships, doesn't she? I nodded, surprising myself by understanding exactly what Eleanor meant. This poem about reinvention after loss, it's powerful. You should take it home, Eleanor suggested, on the house. I couldn't consider it a new beginnings gift, she insisted. Besides, I need someone to discuss it with. None of my regular customers appreciate Collins the way she deserves. As I drove home with the book beside me, I realized something that made me pull over to the side of the road in shock. For years, I'd avoided discussing literature with Thomas, intimidated by his academic analysis, his vast knowledge, his dismissive attitude toward what he called amateur interpretations. But with Eleanor, I'd felt comfortable sharing my thoughts, my emotional response to the poetry, and she'd valued my perspective. Was it possible that my supposed lack of intellectual compatibility with Thomas had been less about my capabilities and more about his inability to create space for my voice? Had I internalized his judgment of me so completely that I'd stopped believing in my own intelligence? I continued home with a new determination forming. Thomas had robbed me of many things over the years: my career aspirations, my confidence, my sense of self outside of being his wife. But I wouldn't let him take my future, too. That night, I made a list of all the things I'd set aside or surrendered during my marriage: nursing school, piano lessons, writing poetry, traveling to Europe, learning to swim properly. The list grew, longer as memories surfaced of interests mentioned and then abandoned, because Thomas had subtly or not so subtly dismissed them. Next to each item, I wrote a simple question. Still interested? Some things were clearly in the past. At 72, I wasn't going to attend nursing school or learn to skydive. But others? Travel. music, writing, swimming. These were still within reach. I fell asleep that night with a sense of cautious optimism. Thomas had chosen his path forward with Patricia. Now it was time for me to choose mine, one that had nothing to do with either of them. The next morning my phone rang. It was Victor Steinman. "Mrs. Parker," he said, his tone professional but warm. "I've received a response from your husband's attorney regarding our initial filing. I think you should come to the office so we can discuss it in person." 3 hours later, I sat across from Steinman as he outlined the counteroffer Thomas's lawyer had presented. "He's proposing a 60-40 split of assets in his favor," Steinman explained. "His argument is that his pension and investments are primarily a result of his career achievements, with your contributions being secondary." My stomach clenched. "That's absurd. I supported his career for 50 years. "I agree," Steinman said, "and so will the judge if this goes to court. But there's more. He's claiming that the house needs significant renovations before it can be sold, which would reduce your share of the equity." "The house is in perfect condition," I protested. "We just had the roof replaced last year and updated the kitchen." "A decade ago." Steinman nodded, making notes. "That's helpful to know. I'll have an independent appraiser evaluate the property." "What else?" I asked, bracing myself. "He's offering a lump sum settlement of $150,000 in lieu of ongoing alimony or support payments." I did some quick mental math. "That wouldn't last very long, especially if I need to find a new place to live." "Exactly," Steinman agreed. "It's an insultingly low offer, especially considering the length of your marriage and the fact that you sacrificed your own career opportunities to support his." "So what now?" I asked. "Now we counter," Steinman said, his expression determined. "I'll draft a response that outlines what we consider a fair settlement. 50% of all assets, including the pension, ongoing alimony, and immediate access to liquid funds so you can begin establishing your independent life." As I left his office, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger at Thomas's continued attempts to minimize my contributions, but also a growing resolve. This fight wasn't just about money or property. It was about acknowledging the value of the life I'd lived and the sacrifices I'd made. That evening, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Eleanor, this is Patricia Davis. I'd like to speak with you. Could we meet for coffee?" My first instinct was to refuse. What could Thomas's mistress possibly have to say that I would want to hear? But curiosity got the better of me. After a moment's hesitation, I typed back, "The coffee shop on Elm Street. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, choosing a table in the corner with a clear view of the entrance. The coffee shop on Elm Street was neutral territory, neither a place Thomas and I frequented together nor anywhere I had personal connections. Perfect for this strange meeting with the woman who had replaced me in my husband's life. At precisely 10 a.m., Patricia walked through the door. She was dressed in a tasteful blue blouse and tailored slacks, her silver bob gleaming under the cafe lights. Several patrons looked up as she entered. She had the kind of presence that naturally drew attention. She spotted me immediately and made her way over, her expression composed but wary. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, setting her purse on the empty chair beside her. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak just yet. A server approached, and we both ordered coffee, mine black, hers with cream and a sprinkle of cinnamon. A detail I filed away without fully understanding why. Once the server left, Patricia folded her hands on the table. "I know this is unconventional, but I felt we should talk, woman to woman." "About what?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "About the situation with Thomas," she said. "About the divorce proceedings." I raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't aware that was any of your business." Patricia sighed. I understand your hostility. I'd feel the same in your position. But the fact is, Thomas is deeply upset about how adversarial this has become. Adversarial, I repeated. What did he expect? That I'd gracefully disappear after he tossed me aside? He never wanted to hurt you, Patricia said, and I had to give her credit for maintaining eye contact. He genuinely believed you'd be amenable to a quick, simple divorce. He thought you'd both been unhappy for years. I laughed softly, the sound brittle even to my own ears. Of course he did. Thomas has always been skilled at rewriting history to suit his narrative. I wasn't unhappy, Patricia, unfulfilled in some ways, perhaps, but I believed we had a solid marriage based on mutual respect and shared history. Patricia sipped her coffee, her brow furrowed. He told me you'd grown apart decades ago, that you had separate lives under the same roof. And you believed him because it made what you were doing more acceptable, I said. Not as an accusation, but as a simple statement of fact. She had the grace to look ashamed. Perhaps. But I also believed him because it matched what I saw when you both attended Howard's retirement party 5 years ago. I blinked, surprised. You were watching us even then? Not intentionally, Patricia clarified, but I noticed how Thomas lit up when discussing his research with colleagues, and how you stood apart from those conversations. How there seemed to be a distance between you even when you were side by side. The observation stung because there was truth in it. I had felt out of place at academic gatherings, intimidated by the intellectual discussions, unsure how to contribute. And Thomas had never bridged that gap, never thought to include me or translate the academic jargon. He'd simply accepted my silence as natural. That was one evening, I said finally. One glimpse into a 50-year marriage. You can't possibly understand the entirety of our relationship from that. You're right, Patricia conceded. I can't, which is why I'm here. I want to understand your perspective. I studied her, trying to discern her motivation. Why? What difference does it make to you now? You've won. You have Thomas. Patricia shook her head. This isn't about winning or losing. It's about finding a resolution that doesn't destroy everyone involved. Thomas is distraught over the legal proceedings, over the possibility of his reputation being damaged. His reputation, I repeated. Of course. That's always been his primary concern. Not just that, Patricia insisted. He's worried about you, about your future. He wants to be fair. I couldn't help it. I laughed out loud. Fair? He offered me $2,000 a month after 50 years of marriage. He proposed a 60-40 split of our assets in his favor. That's his definition of fair? Patricia looked genuinely surprised. He told me he was offering an equitable settlement. Then he lied to you too, I said simply. Which shouldn't come as a shock, considering he's been lying to me for months. We sat in silence for a moment, the ambient noise of the cafe filling the space between us. What would you consider fair? Patricia asked finally. I met her gaze steadily. Half of everything we built together. Recognition of my contributions to his career and our family. The dignity of not being discarded like an outdated appliance. Patricia nodded slowly. That seems reasonable. Does it? I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. I expected you to defend him. I love Thomas, Patricia said, her voice softening, but that doesn't make him perfect. If he's being unfair to you after 50 years of marriage, that's wrong. I wasn't sure how to respond to this unexpected alliance. Patricia seemed genuinely concerned about reaching a just resolution, which didn't fit the homewrecker narrative I'd constructed in my mind. Can I ask you something? I said after a moment. Of course. When did it start between you and Thomas? Truthfully. Patricia took a deep breath. We reconnected on social media about 2 years ago, just as friends. Howard was already ill. By then, early stage dementia. Thomas offered support, advice about caregiving. We started talking regularly, mostly about books and Howard's condition. And then, I prompted, after Howard was moved to a memory care facility last year, Thomas came to visit. Just as a friend, I thought. But something shifted that day. We talked for hours about books, memories, regrets. He told me about feeling intellectually isolated in his marriage. Those were his words, not mine. I flinched, but gestured for her to continue. We started meeting for coffee, then lunch. Always in public, always as friends. She paused, looking down at her hands. Howard passed away 6 months ago. Thomas attended the funeral, was a pillar of support. And then, about a month later, he told me he had feelings for me. That he'd never stopped loving me, not really. And you believed him, I said, unable to keep the skepticism from my voice. I wanted to, Patricia admitted. Thomas and I had something special when we were young, a connection based on shared dreams, intellectual passion. When we reconnected, that spark was still there. So special he never mentioned you in 50 years of marriage, I commented. Patricia looked startled. He never talked about me? Not once, I confirmed. Not until he wanted a divorce. This information seemed to trouble her. That's odd. He told me he'd always carried our relationship with him, that it had shaped his academic interests. Perhaps he did, I said. But he never shared that with me. Patricia was quiet for a moment, processing this revelation. I'm sorry, Eleanor. This must be incredibly painful for you. The simple acknowledgement of my pain, surprisingly, opened something in me. Do you know what hurts the most? I found myself saying. It's not just losing Thomas. It's discovering that our entire life together might have been a consolation prize, that I was his second choice all along. Patricia's expression softened. I don't think that's true. Thomas and I were young when we dated, just teenagers with grand dreams. What you built with him was real, regardless of how things have ended. Was it? I questioned. If he could discard it so easily, was it ever real at all? Before Patricia could answer, my phone rang. It was Victor Steinman. Excuse me, I said, standing to take the call a few steps away from the table. Mrs. Parker, Steinman's voice was brisk. I've received some documents from your husband's attorney that you should see immediately. Financial records that weren't initially disclosed. What kind of records? I asked, keeping my voice low. Investment accounts we weren't aware of, and property transactions from the past year. Can you come to my office this afternoon? I'll be there at 2, I promised, ending the call and returning to the table. Patricia was watching me with concern. Is everything all right? Apparently Thomas has been hiding financial information, I said, gathering my purse. My attorney needs to see me this afternoon. Patricia's face fell. I had no idea. Eleanor, I swear to you, I thought he was being transparent about everything. Perhaps there are things he hasn't told either of us, I suggested, standing to leave. This coffee was enlightening. Thank you for reaching out. Patricia stood as well. I meant what I said earlier. You deserve a fair settlement after 50 years. I'll talk to Thomas. Do what you feel is right, I said. But understand that at this point, only legal agreements matter. Words and promises aren't enough anymore. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt strangely lighter. Meeting Patricia had complicated my narrative of villains and victims, but it had also reinforced my determination to fight for what I deserved. If Thomas was hiding assets, that only confirmed I was right not to trust his offers of fairness. At Steinman's office, the atmosphere was tense as he spread documents across his desk. These were obtained through our discovery request, he explained. Your husband initially failed to disclose them, but his attorney has now supplemented their financial statement presumably because they realized we'd find these accounts eventually. I leaned forward, examining bank statements and property deeds. What am I looking at? This, Steinman pointed to a statement from an investment firm, is an account containing approximately $275,000 that wasn't listed in your husband's initial financial disclosure. And this, he shifted to a property deed, is documentation of a house purchase made 3 months ago in both Thomas Parker and Patricia Davis's names. 3 months ago? I echoed, stunned. But that was before Howard had even passed away. Steinman's eyebrows rose. Howard Davis was Patricia's husband? I nodded, still processing this revelation. She told me they reconnected as friends while he was ill, but that their relationship didn't become romantic until after he died. Well, they jointly purchased this property while Mr. Davis was still alive, Steinman said, tapping the date on the deed. A 4-bedroom house in Riverside Estates. That's one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in Oak Ridge, I said, my stomach clenching. How much? $850,000, Steinman replied, with a down payment of $250,000, money that appears to have come from the undisclosed investment account. I sat back, feeling as if the air had been knocked from my lungs. They were planning this for months, before Howard died, before Thomas ever mentioned divorce to me. It certainly appears that way, Steinman agreed, his expression grim. Which is very significant for our case. This shows clear premeditation and intent to hide marital assets. What does this mean practically? I asked. It means we go on the offensive, Steinman said firmly. We file a motion for contempt, based on the hidden assets, and we adjust our settlement demands to account for his dishonesty. Judges take a very dim view of parties who hide assets during divorce proceedings. And the house they purchased? That's marital property, purchased with marital funds, Steinman explained. You're entitled to your share of it, either half, its value, or potentially the entire property, depending on how the judge views your husband's attempts to conceal these transactions. I thought of my conversation with Patricia earlier that day, her seeming sincerity, her apparent surprise at learning of Thomas's unfair settlement offers. Patricia might not know about the hidden accounts, I said. She seemed genuinely shocked when I told her about Thomas's initial settlement proposal. Steinman shrugged. Whether she knew or not is irrelevant to our case. The fact remains that your husband used marital funds to purchase property with another woman before informing you of his intent to divorce. That's textbook financial misconduct. As I drove home, my mind swirled with this new information. Thomas and Patricia had been planning their life together, spending our money on their future home, while I remained completely unaware. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd thought possible. At home, I paced restlessly, unable to settle. Finally, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened Thomas's study. The room had always been his domain, a space I entered only to dust or deliver coffee when he was working. Now I examined it with new eyes, looking for any additional evidence of deception. The room was meticulously organized, as always. Bookshelves lined with academic texts and historical volumes, a large mahogany desk with his computer, and a neat stack of papers. Filing cabinets containing decades of research and correspondence. I sat at his desk, opening drawers at random. Most contained what I expected: office supplies, folders of academic papers, old conference programs. But in the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of file folders, I found a small, leather-bound book. It was a journal, the pages filled with Thomas's distinctive handwriting. I hesitated only briefly before beginning to read. The entries dated back 5 years, sporadic at first, but becoming more regular over time. May 12th, 2020, saw Patricia. At Howard's retirement party. She's still beautiful, still brilliant. We talked about my latest book. She'd actually read it, understood the nuances in a way Ellie never could. Felt a connection I haven't experienced in decades. September 3rd, 2020. Messaged Patricia today. Howard has early-stage dementia. Offered what advice I could from when my mother was ill. Strange to be in contact after all these years, but it feels natural. The entries continued, documenting the progression of their relationship from rekindled friendship to emotional affair to concrete plans for a future together. January 17th, 2022. Howard moved to memory care today. Visited Patricia to offer support. Ended up talking for hours about life, regrets, the paths not taken. I've never felt so understood, so seen. The connection between us is undeniable. If only. April 30th, 2022. Howard deteriorating rapidly. Patricia devastated but handling it with characteristic grace. I find myself thinking of her constantly, imagining what might have been if she hadn't chosen Harvard over me all those years ago. July 8th, 2022. Made a decision today. Once Howard passes, I will tell Patricia how I feel. And then I must tell Ellie that our marriage has run its course. It won't be easy, but at our age, we don't have time to waste on the wrong life. August 15th, 2022. Found the perfect house today in Riverside Estates. Patricia doesn't know yet. It will be a surprise for after Howard's passing. I've started moving funds to a separate account to prepare for the purchase and the divorce. Ellie never looks at our finances anyway. September 29th, 2022. Howard passed. Last night. Attending the funeral will be difficult, maintaining the appearance of just being an old friend, while my heart breaks for Patricia's pain. But soon, we can stop pretending. November 10th, 2022. Told Patricia I love her today. That I've always loved her. She cried, said she's felt the same, but thought it was too late for us. It's not too late. We're going to build a life together for whatever time we have left. December 5th, 2022. Showed Patricia the house today. She was overwhelmed. We signed the papers together. Our future is becoming real. Now I just need to find the right moment to tell Ellie. After the holidays, perhaps. No need to ruin Christmas for everyone. I closed the journal, my hands shaking with anger and hurt. Every word was a betrayal. Not just of our marriage, but of my trust, my dignity, my place in his life. While I was decorating our home for Christmas, cooking his favorite meals, buying thoughtful gifts, Thomas was planning his escape, his new life with Patricia. And Howard, poor Howard, who Thomas pretended to support while coveting his wife. The hypocrisy was staggering. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. We need to talk about the legal proceedings. This is getting out of hand. Dinner at the Eyes. Grand tomorrow night? 7 p.m.? The Grand was one of the finest restaurants in Oak Ridge, a place we went only for special occasions. Thomas's attempt at creating a civilized backdrop for what would undoubtedly be another effort to manipulate me into accepting less than I deserved. I typed back, "Can't make dinner. Ask Patricia about our coffee conversation. And while you're at it, ask her how she feels about you purchasing your love nest 3 months before Howard died." His response came quickly. "What are you talking about?" I didn't bother answering. Let him squirm, wondering exactly what I knew and what Patricia had told me. Instead, I called Jessica. When she answered, I said without preamble, "Did you know your father bought a house with Patricia 3 months before Howard died? While he was still married to me?" The shocked silence on the other end of the line was answer enough. "Mom," Jessica finally managed, "that can't be right. Dad wouldn't—" "He did," I cut her off. "I've seen the property deed, and I found his journal, detailing exactly how long he's been planning this." "Oh, God," Jessica whispered. "I had no idea." "I swear, Mom. I knew they reconnected as friends last year, but Dad told me their relationship didn't become romantic until after Howard's funeral, that they were both surprised by their feelings." "Well, he lied to you too," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "He's been lying to all of us." I'm coming over, Jessica declared. Give me 20 minutes. True to her word, Jessica arrived shortly after, her face drawn with concern. I showed her the notes I'd taken from Thomas's journal, not wanting to share the actual journal with Steinman before consulting with Steinman. Jessica read in silence, her expression shifting from disbelief to horror to anger. That manipulative, lying. She couldn't even finish the sentence. Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I know, I said, the fight draining out of me as I sank onto the couch. But this makes it even more clear that I can't trust anything your father says or offers. He's been systematically deceiving me and you for years. Jessica sat beside me, taking my hand. What can I do? How can I help? Just believe me, I said simply. Stand by me through this. Don't let him twist the narrative again. I believe you, Jessica said firmly, and I'm here, whatever you need. After she left, promising to come by again the next day, I sat in the quiet house, Thomas's journal still on the coffee table. The validation of knowing I hadn't imagined or exaggerated his betrayal was cold comfort. Nothing could erase the humiliation of learning that while I was being a devoted wife, my husband was methodically planning his exit. My phone rang again, Eleanor this time. How did the meeting with Patricia go? She asked without preamble. Surprisingly civil, I admitted. She seemed genuinely concerned about reaching a fair resolution. And you believe her? Eleanor sounded skeptical. I did, I said. Until I met with my lawyer afterward and discovered Thomas has been hiding assets and purchased a house with Patricia 3 months before Howard died. Eleanor cursed colorfully. That snake. Did Patricia know? She claimed their relationship didn't become romantic until after Howard's death, I said. But the house purchase suggests otherwise. Whether she knew about the hidden accounts, I'm not sure. What's your next move? Eleanor asked. My lawyer is filing a motion for contempt based on the hidden assets, I explained. And I found Thomas's journal, which details everything. The emotional affair, the financial planning, all of it. Good, Eleanor declared. Use everything you've got. This isn't just about money, Ellie. It's about your dignity. After hanging up, I made a pot of tea and curled up in my favorite chair in the sunroom, watching darkness settle over the garden. The peace I'd always found in this space eluded me tonight, my mind too full of betrayal and uncertainty about the future. My phone lit up with another text from Thomas. Patricia told me about your coffee meeting. I don't know what you think you found, but you're misinterpreting things. We need to talk face to face. I turned off my phone without responding. There was nothing left to say. The next morning, I met with Steinman again, bringing Thomas's journal with me. He read through it carefully, his expression growing grimmer with each page. This is extremely damaging to your husband's case, he said when he finished. It establishes clear intent to deceive, shows premeditation in hiding assets, and contradicts the narrative he's been presenting about when his relationship with Ms. Davis began. Can we use it in court? I asked. Absolutely, Steinman confirmed. Personal journals are admissible evidence in divorce proceedings, especially when they contain relevant information about finances and the timeline of marital breakdown. What happens now? I'll amend our filings to include this new evidence, Steinman explained. And I suspect that once your husband's attorney sees what we have, they'll be eager to settle, rather than have this all come out in open court. Thomas values his reputation above all else, I agreed. The idea of his colleagues and former students learning about his deception would be unbearable to him. Exactly, Steinman nodded. Which gives us significant leverage. I suggest we prepare a settlement proposal that clearly states our terms. Equitable division of all assets including the hidden accounts, your name added to the deed of the Riverside Estates property or equivalent compensation, ongoing alimony, and a lump sum to account for his attempts to hide assets. And if he refuses? I asked. Then we go to court, Steinman said simply, where all of this becomes public record. As I left Steinman's office, I felt a curious mixture of vindication and sadness. The evidence would force Thomas to offer a fair settlement, but at what cost to my own peace of mind? The journal entries had confirmed my worst fears, that I had been loved conditionally, valued primarily for my utility rather than myself. But there was something else in those pages, too, a revelation that Thomas's dissatisfaction was more about him than about me. His complaints about my lack of intellectual engagement, my focus on home rather than academic discourse, were reflections of his own narrow definition of worthwhile pursuits. I had spent decades believing I wasn't enough, when perhaps the truth was that he wasn't capable of appreciating what I offered. That afternoon, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Parker, this is Gregory Jenkins. I was Howard Davis's nephew. The name was vaguely familiar. I recalled Patricia mentioning a nephew who had been close to Howard. Yes, Mr. Jenkins. What can I do for you? I understand you're going through a divorce from Thomas Parker, he said, and that he's now involved with my Aunt Patricia. That's correct, I said cautiously. I have information you might find relevant, Gregory continued, about the timeline of their relationship and about certain financial discussions that took place while my uncle was still alive. My heart raced. What kind of information? I'd prefer to discuss it in person, he said. Would you be available to meet tomorrow? We arranged to meet at a cafe downtown the following morning. As I hung up, I wondered what possible information Howard's nephew might have, and whether it would help or further complicate my case against Thomas. That evening, as I was preparing a simple dinner for myself, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Thomas stood on the porch, his expression a mixture of anger and anxiety. We need to talk, he said. You're not answering my calls or texts. I have nothing to say to you, I replied, moving to close the door. Thomas put his hand out, preventing me from shutting it. Ellie, please. Things have gotten completely out of hand. Your lawyer is making unreasonable demands based on misunderstandings. Misunderstandings, I repeated. Like the misunderstanding about the $275,000 you hid in a separate account? Or the misunderstanding about purchasing a house with Patricia while Howard was still alive? And while you were still married to me? Thomas paled. How did you find out? I finished for him. Discovery works both ways, Thomas. And unlike you, I actually read the documents my lawyer gives me. It's not what you think, he insisted. The house was an investment opportunity. Patricia and I— Save it, I cut him off. I found your journal. The color drained completely from his face. You went through my private things? Your private things in our shared home, I clarified. Where you detailed your ongoing emotional affair with Patricia and your plans to leave me as soon as Howard died. Thomas's shoulders sagged. You can't possibly understand what Patricia and I have. The connection, the intellectual compatibility, it's something you and I never had, I interrupted. Or never had because you decided from the beginning that I wasn't intellectual enough for you. Because you never bothered to nurture my interests or include me in your world? That's not fair, Thomas protested. I encouraged you to read, to learn. You patronized me, I corrected. You assigned me books like a student and then criticized my understanding of them. You excluded me from conversations at faculty events. You made me feel like I didn't belong in your intellectual world, and then blamed me for not being part of it. Thomas stared at me, seeming genuinely surprised by this perspective. That's not how I saw it. Of course it isn't, I said tiredly. Because you've always been more concerned with how things affect you than with how they affect anyone else. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of 50 years and countless misunderstandings hanging between us. What do you want, Ellie? Thomas asked finally. To punish me? To take everything I've worked for? I want what's fair, I said simply. Half of everything we built together. Recognition of my contributions to your career and our family. And acknowledgement that what you did, the lies, the hidden assets, the secret planning, was wrong. Thomas ran a hand through his hair. And if I agree to those terms, then we can settle this quickly and privately, I said. No need for a public court battle that would damage your precious reputation. You're blackmailing me, he accused. No, Thomas. I'm finally standing up for myself after 50 years of putting your needs first. I began to close the door. Again. Talk to your lawyer. Mine will be in touch with a settlement proposal. This time, he didn't try to stop me from shutting the door. I leaned against it afterward, heart pounding, overwhelmed by the confrontation, but also strangely empowered. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, I had spoken my truth without tempering it to protect Thomas's feelings. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. Just checking in. How are you holding up? I typed back. Better than expected. Meeting Howard's nephew tomorrow. He says he has information about Thomas and Patricia. Eleanor's response came quickly. Intriguing? Want me to come with you? The offer of support touched me deeply. Yes, please. Café Bleu, 10 a.m. That night, I slept more soundly than I had since finding those keys in Thomas's briefcase. Something had shifted inside me during my confrontation with him. A realization that the end of our marriage, painful as it was, might also be the beginning of my long-deferred self-discovery. The next morning, Eleanor and I arrived at Café Bleu a few minutes early. Gregory Jenkins was already there, a man in his 40s with Howard's same kind eyes and thoughtful demeanor. After introductions, he got straight to the point. Mrs. Parker, I want to be clear about why I'm here. My Uncle Howard was a good man who loved Patricia completely. What Thomas and Patricia did, carrying on their relationship while he was ill, making plans for after his death, was reprehensible. You knew about their relationship? I asked. Gregory nodded grimly. I managed Howard's care during his illness. I was at the house frequently, often when Thomas visited. At first, I thought nothing of it, just an old friend offering support during a difficult time. But I began to notice things. Long walks together, intimate conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Text messages that made Patricia smile in a way I hadn't seen in years. Eleanor leaned forward. Did you confront them? I confronted Patricia, Gregory confirmed. About 3 months before Howard passed, she denied anything improper was happening, claimed Thomas was just being supportive. But then I found emails on Howard's computer. Patricia had used it once and forgotten to log out of her account. What did the emails say? I asked, though I already had a sinking feeling I knew. They were discussing their future together, Gregory said, his disgust evident. Planning for after Howard's death, they meant. Thomas wrote about properties he was looking at for them, about how they would travel together, build the life they'd been denied in their youth. The confirmation of what I'd read in Thomas's journal still stung, despite my foreknowledge. Did Howard know? Gregory's expression softened with sadness. In his lucid moments toward the end, I think he suspected something. He asked me once if Patricia seemed happy, if she had someone to look after her when he was gone. I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. I'm so sorry, I said sincerely, for Howard and for you having to carry this knowledge. Uncle Howard provided generously for Patricia in his will, Gregory continued. Their house was paid off, and he left her with substantial investments and insurance policies, over $2 million in total. I stared at him, processing this information. $2 million? But Thomas told me Patricia needed financial support, that she was struggling after Howard's death. Gregory's laugh was bitter. Struggling? Hardly. Aunt Patricia has always lived well, and Howard made certain that wouldn't change after he was gone. The idea that she needed Thomas's financial support is absurd. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand. "Because I believe in justice," Gregory said simply. "What they did to Howard, and to you, was wrong. Using my uncle's illness as cover for their affair, planning their life together while pretending to be supportive. It was calculated and cruel." "Do you have copies of these emails?" Eleanor asked pragmatically. Gregory nodded, pulling a flash drive from his pocket. "Everything's here. The emails, financial documents showing Patricia's inheritance, even photos I took of them together when they didn't know I was watching. I'm not proud of the surveillance, but I wanted evidence in case Howard asked directly." I accepted the flash drive, feeling its weight in my palm, the weight of yet more evidence of Thomas's duplicity. "Thank you for this. It can't have been easy to come forward." "It wasn't," Gregory admitted. "I still care about Aunt Patricia despite everything, but what they've done, how they've behaved, it isn't right. And I couldn't stand by knowing they might get away with it, that you might be left with less than you deserve while they enjoy the fruits of their deception." As Gregory left, Eleanor squeezed my hand. "Are you okay?" I considered the question. Seriously, I think I am. Each new revelation hurts, but also clarifies. I'm starting to see that what I thought was a solid marriage was built on Thomas's convenience and my compromise. "What will you do with this new information?" Eleanor asked, nodding toward the flash drive. "Take it to Steinman," I said without hesitation. "Let him incorporate it into our case. Thomas and Patricia have been manipulating the narrative from the beginning, portraying their relationship as something pure that blossomed after Howard's death. The truth needs to come out." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "You've changed, Ellie. A month ago, you might have hidden this information to protect Thomas's feelings or reputation. A month ago, I still thought our marriage meant something to him," I replied. "Now I know better, and I'm done protecting someone who never protected me." As we left the cafe, I felt a strange sense of clarity descending. The pain of betrayal was still there, but increasingly overshadowed by determination. Thomas and Patricia had calculatingly built their happiness on the pain of others. They didn't deserve protection or consideration they hadn't shown to me or to Howard. It was time for truth, for justice, and for me to finally put myself first, after 50 years in the shadows. Victor Steinman's face remained impassive as he reviewed the contents of Gregory Jenkins' flash drive, but I could see the slight widening of his eyes, the occasional tightening of his jaw that revealed his surprise and indignation. When he finally looked up at me, his professional demeanor couldn't quite mask his anger on my behalf. "Mrs. Parker," he said, carefully removing his reading glasses, "this evidence is significant. The emails between your husband and Ms. Davis clearly demonstrate they were planning a future together while both Mr. Davis and your marriage were very much intact." "And Patricia's financial situation?" I prompted. "According to these documents, Ms. Davis inherited approximately $3 million from her late husband, including a fully paid-off home, investment accounts, and substantial life insurance proceeds." He tapped a manicured finger against a financial statement. "She is far from the financially vulnerable widow your husband portrayed her to be." I nodded, processing this confirmation of yet another deception. So Thomas's claim that she needed his financial support was a lie. "Entirely," Steinman confirmed. "What's particularly disturbing is that their house purchase was made using your marital assets, when Ms. Davis clearly had sufficient funds of her own to contribute equally, if not entirely." The implications settled heavily on my shoulders. They were using our money because they didn't want to touch hers. "That appears to be the case," Steinman agreed. "And it constitutes financial misconduct that significantly strengthens our position." He leaned forward, his expression serious. Mrs. Parker, with this new evidence, I believe we should revise our settlement demands. Your husband's deceptive behavior and misuse of marital assets justifies a more aggressive approach. What are you suggesting? I asked. I think we should demand 65% of all marital assets in your favor, including their new home, plus significant alimony. A hint of satisfaction crossed his features. Or we can offer an alternative, a 50-50 split as originally proposed, but with the understanding that we will not agree to keep this information confidential. The choice would be his. The thought of using this information as leverage made me uncomfortable, despite everything Thomas had done. Isn't that blackmail? I asked. Steinman shook his head firmly. Not at all. We're simply presenting the facts as they exist and offering settlement options accordingly. Your husband and Ms. Davis engaged in behavior that, when presented to a judge, would likely result in a judgment in your favor anyway. We're simply giving them the opportunity to settle this matter privately. I considered this, weighing my desire for justice against my distaste for using threats, however justified. Let's start with demanding a fair 50-50 split of everything, including the house they purchased together, and full financial transparency. If Thomas refuses, then we can consider the more aggressive approach. A reasonable starting position, Steinman agreed, though I detected a hint of disappointment at my moderation. I'll prepare a settlement proposal immediately. We should also file these new documents with the court to ensure they're part of the record. As I left Steinman's office, I felt a curious mix of vindication and exhaustion. Each new revelation about Thomas's duplicity reinforced that I was right to fight for my fair share, but the emotional toll of discovering the extent of his betrayal was wearing me down. I drove aimlessly for a while, not ready to return to the empty house that no longer felt like home. Eventually, I found myself parking outside Coffee and Books, Eleanor's shop. The familiar bell jingled as I pushed open the door. Eleanor looked up from the register, her face brightening when she saw me. "Ellie, perfect timing. I just brewed a fresh pot of that vanilla hazelnut blend you liked last time." I managed a small smile, making my way to the comfortable armchair in the corner that had become my unofficial spot over the past weeks. Eleanor joined me a few minutes later, bearing 2 steaming mugs and a plate of lemon cookies. "How did it go with Steinman?" she asked once we were settled. "The evidence from Gregory is even more damning than we thought," I said, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. Thomas and Patricia were explicitly planning their future together months before Howard died. And it turns out Patricia inherited over $2 million. She never needed Thomas's financial support at all. Eleanor's eyebrows shot up. "But Thomas used your marital assets to buy their love nest?" I nodded. Apparently they were preserving her inheritance while spending our money. That lying, manipulative? Eleanor trailed off, taking a deliberate sip of coffee to calm herself. After a moment, she asked more gently, "How are you holding up with all this, Ellie? Really?" The simple question, asked with such genuine concern, nearly undid me. I felt tears pricking behind my eyes and blinked rapidly to hold them back. "I'm managing. Each new discovery hurts, but in a strange way, it also makes things clearer, makes it easier to fight for what I deserve." "That's my girl," Eleanor said approvingly, reaching across to squeeze my hand. "You know, I've been thinking about your situation, about what comes next for you." "What do you mean?" "After the divorce is settled," she clarified. "Have you thought about what you want your life to look like once this is all behind you?" I hesitated, realizing I'd been so focused on the legal battle that I hadn't spent much time envisioning my future beyond it. "Not in detail. I know I won't be able to keep the house. It's too large for one person anyway. I've thought about volunteering, maybe taking some classes." "Classes?" Eleanor pounced on this. "What kind?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Art? History, maybe? Literature?" Things I've always been interested in but never pursued seriously because Thomas. I trailed off, not wanting to complete the thought. Because Thomas made you feel like you weren't intellectual enough? Eleanor finished for me, her voice gentle but firm. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. He always made it clear that my interpretations weren't as valuable as his scholarly analysis. After a while, I just stopped sharing my thoughts. Well, that's a load of pretentious garbage, Eleanor declared. You have one of the most insightful minds I know, Ellie. You just haven't had the space to develop your confidence. Her faith in me was both touching and uncomfortable. I'd spent so long accepting Thomas's assessment of my intellectual capabilities that hearing a different perspective was disorienting. I've been thinking, Eleanor continued, setting down her mug. I'm getting older, and running the shop by myself is becoming more challenging. I've been considering taking on a partner. I blinked, surprised by the apparent change of subject. That makes sense. Do you have someone in mind? Eleanor fixed me with a meaningful look. I do, actually. You. Me? I echoed, certain I'd misunderstood. Eleanor, I don't know anything about running a bookstore. You love books, she countered. You have excellent taste. You're organized and responsible. The business side can be learned. But I don't have any experience in retail or... Experience isn't what I'm looking for, Eleanor interrupted. I'm looking for passion, commitment, and a fresh perspective. You've spent 50 years supporting Thomas's career and dreams. Maybe it's time to build something for yourself. The idea was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. I wouldn't even know where to begin. That's what partners are for, Eleanor said with a smile. I'd teach you everything I know, and you'd bring your own ideas. We could expand the cafe section, maybe start a reading series for seniors like we discussed. You're serious about this, I realized, studying her face. Completely, she confirmed. Think about it, Ellie. No pressure, no timeline. But consider the possibility. I promised I would, though the idea seemed far-fetched given my current situation. Still, Eleanor had planted a seed, a vision of a future where I wasn't defined, solely as Thomas's ex-wife, but as a person with her own pursuits and passions. When I arrived home, there was a sleek silver car in the driveway I didn't recognize. As I approached the front door, it opened to reveal Jessica, her expression a mix of determination and contrition. Mom, she said, stepping aside to let me enter. I hope you don't mind that I used my key. There's someone here who wants to talk to you. In the living room stood Patricia, looking elegant but uncomfortable in a simple gray dress. She rose when I entered, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Eleanor, she began. I understand if you want me to leave, but please hear me. Out first. I looked between her and Jessica, confused. What's going on? Jessica moved to stand beside me. Patricia came to see me at work today. She had quite a story to tell, and I thought you should hear it directly from her. I set down my purse and took a seat, gesturing for Patricia to do the same. I'm listening. Patricia took a deep breath. After our coffee meeting, I confronted Thomas about the settlement he'd offered you. He brushed it off, said you were exaggerating, that he'd been more than generous. She paused, visibly gathering her thoughts. I didn't fully believe him, but I wanted to. Then yesterday, he received a call from his lawyer about new evidence that had been submitted. Emails between us, financial records. Gregory Jenkins, I said, not bothering to hide my knowledge. Patricia nodded, a flash of pain crossing her features. Yes, Howard's nephew. Thomas was agitated after the call. He started making accusations that you were trying to ruin him, destroy his reputation, that you were vindictive and unreasonable. That sounds familiar, I said dryly. I asked to see the settlement proposal he'd made, Patricia continued. Really see it, not just hear his summary. He reluctantly showed me the documents. She shook her head, genuine dismay in her expression. It was worse than you described. Not just the unequal financial split, but clauses restricting your ability to stay in Oak Ridge, limitations on your access to friends you'd made through his university connections. The revelation of these additional restrictions I hadn't even known about struck me like a physical blow. He wanted to exile me from my own community? Essentially, yes, Patricia confirmed. When I confronted him, he became defensive, said you'd never utilized those connections anyway, that you'd be happier somewhere simpler, with people more on your level. Jessica made a sound of disgust. Can you believe that? After all you've done for him? For us? Patricia continued. I was horrified. This wasn't the Thomas I thought I knew. I started questioning other things he'd told me. About your marriage, about my financial situation. He'd led me to believe I needed his support, that Howard's estate was mostly tied up in trusts I couldn't access for years. But that wasn't true, I said. No, it wasn't, Patricia agreed. I checked with my financial advisor this morning. Everything Howard left me is fully accessible, more than enough for me to live comfortably for the rest of my life. She looked down at her hands. Thomas suggested we use his funds for our house purchase to protect my inheritance. I thought he was being considerate. He was being manipulative, Jessica said bluntly. He wanted control over you, just like he's tried to control Mom all these years. Patricia nodded slowly. I think you're right. When I confronted him with what I'd learned, he became angry, dismissive. He said I was being emotional, that I didn't understand the complexities of the situation. A bitter smile crossed her face. The same things he used to say to me when we were young, actually. I'd forgotten that pattern. Why are you telling me this? I asked, genuinely curious. Why come to Jessica first? Because I wanted to apologize to both of you, Patricia said simply. I believed what Thomas told me about your marriage, about you. I convinced myself that what we were doing wasn't really wrong because you were already emotionally estranged. I allowed my history with Thomas to cloud my judgment. Jessica moved to sit beside me on the couch. Patricia showed me emails from Dad, ones that Gregory hadn't captured. They're illuminating. He's been presenting completely different versions of events to each of you, playing on Patricia's romanticized memories of their youthful relationship, while simultaneously dismissing your intelligence and contributions to his life. Classic manipulation, I murmured, not entirely surprised. Thomas had always been skilled at telling people exactly what they wanted to hear. There's more, Patricia said, reaching into her purse to pull out a folded document. This morning, I removed my name from the deed to the Riverside Estates house. It's now solely in Thomas's name, which should make it easier for your attorney to claim it as marital property. I stared at the document she handed me, a notarized deed transfer. Why would you do this? Because it's the right thing to do, Patricia said simply. That house was purchased with your marital funds, not mine. I won't benefit from Thomas's deception. What about your relationship with him? I couldn't help asking. Are you still? Patricia shook her head firmly. No. I've ended things with Thomas. The man I thought I was reconnecting with, thoughtful, principled, devoted, doesn't exist. Perhaps he never did, and I was simply projecting my idealized memories onto him. The three of us sat in silence for a moment, each processing the implications of this dramatic shift. Finally, Jessica spoke up. Mom, I wanted you to hear all this from Patricia directly because I think it's important for your case, but also for your peace of mind. Dad has been manipulating all of us, spinning different narratives to serve his purposes. Does Thomas know you're here? I asked Patricia. She smiled grimly. No, and he'll be furious when he finds out. But I'm done being manipulated and I'm done participating in the harm he's caused you. After Patricia left, Jessica remained, making us both tea in the kitchen with the easy familiarity of someone who had grown up in this house. As we sat at the kitchen table, mug steaming between us, she reached for my hand. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I should have seen through Dad's manipulation sooner. I should have questioned his version of events." "It's not your fault," I assured her. "Thomas has always been convincing. He made you believe what he wanted you to believe, just like he did with me for 50 years. "But I'm your daughter," Jessica insisted. "I should have been loyal to you, should have at least given you the benefit of the doubt." "You're also his daughter," I reminded her gently. "It's natural to want to believe your father, to trust his perspective." Jessica sighed, looking down at her tea. "Stephen warned me, you know. He said Dad's story seemed too convenient, too one-sided. I dismissed him, told him he didn't understand the dynamics of our family." She shook her head. "Turns out he understood better than I did." "We've all been blind in our own ways," I said. "The important thing is that we see clearly now." After Jessica left, promising to come by with Lucas over the weekend, I called Steinman to update him on Patricia's visit and the deed transfer. He was pleased but cautious. "This certainly strengthens our position," he said, "but don't assume Thomas will suddenly become reasonable. Men like him often become more aggressive when they feel cornered." "What should I expect?" I asked. "He may try to pressure you directly outside of legal channels," Steinman warned. "Or he might offer a seemingly generous settlement with hidden catches. Don't agree to anything without consulting me first." I promised I wouldn't, though I doubted Thomas would approach me directly after the confrontation at our front door. I was wrong. The next morning, I opened the front door to collect the newspaper and found Thomas sitting in his car at the curb. When he saw me, he got out and approached, his expression a careful mask of contrition. "Ellie," he said, stopping, at the bottom of the porch steps. "We need to talk." I crossed my arms. "I think our lawyers should handle any necessary communication." "Please," he said, a note of genuine desperation in his voice. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Against my better judgment, I nodded. 5 minutes. But we talk out here, not inside. Thomas looked around at the neighbors' houses, clearly uncomfortable with the potential audience, but he nodded. "Patricia came to see me last night. She told me about her visit here, about removing her name from the deed." "And?" I prompted when he paused. "And I realize things have gotten out of hand," he said, running a hand through his silver hair. "The hidden accounts, the house purchase, those were mistakes. I panicked when I realized I wanted a divorce, worried about the financial implications." "So you decided to hide assets and lie," I said flatly. "To me, to Patricia, to Jessica." He had the grace to look ashamed. "I handled everything badly, I see that now. But Ellie, we've been married for 50 years. Surely we can resolve this between ourselves, without lawyers and courts and public humiliation." "Why would you be publicly humiliated, Thomas? Unless you've done something to be ashamed of?" His jaw tightened. "You know exactly what I mean. If all this comes out in court, the emails, the journal, Gregory's statements, my reputation would be destroyed. My legacy as an educator, an academic." "Your legacy," I repeated, understanding dawning. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not fairness or closure, but preserving your image. Is it so wrong to care about how I'll be remembered?" He asked. "I've devoted my life to academia, to shaping minds. Should that all be erased because of personal mistakes?" "Mistakes," I echoed. "Is that what you call systematically deceiving your wife, daughter, and mistress? Planning your exit from our marriage while Howard was still alive? Using our joint funds to build your new life with Patricia?" Thomas sighed heavily. "I know I've hurt you, Ellie, more than I can ever make right, but I'm trying to be reasonable now, to offer a fair settlement. What's your definition of fair this time? I asked skeptically. 50-50, he said promptly. Half of everything, including my pension and the Riverside house, plus continued health insurance coverage through my university plan, and a lump sum to help you establish yourself. The offer was surprisingly reasonable, almost exactly what Steinman and I had initially sought. But something in Thomas's too eager expression made me wary. "And what do you want in exchange?" I asked, certain there was a catch. He hesitated, confirming my suspicion. "Just discretion. A non-disclosure agreement. Neither of us would speak publicly about the details of our divorce or the circumstances leading to it." "You want me to promise not to tell anyone about your affair with Patricia while Howard was ill? About the financial deception? About how you introduced her to our grandson before even telling me you wanted a divorce?" Thomas flinched at each accusation but nodded. "For the sake of both our dignities, yes." "My dignity isn't threatened by the truth, Thomas," I said coldly. "Only yours." "Please, Ellie," he almost begged. "Think about Jessica, about Lucas. Do you want them to bear the stigma of this scandal? For Lucas to hear ugly rumors about his grandfather at school?" The mention of my grandson gave me pause. I hadn't considered how public exposure might affect him. Still, I wasn't about to accept Thomas's terms without proper consideration. "I'll discuss your offer with my attorney," I said finally. "That's all I can promise right now." Thomas looked like he wanted to push further, but thought better of it. "Thank you. I'll have my lawyer send over the details." He turned to go, then hesitated. "For what it's worth, Ellie, I am sorry. Not just for how I've handled the divorce, but for taking you for granted all these years." As I watched him drive away, I wondered how much of his apology was genuine remorse and how much was strategic damage control. The Thomas I thought I knew for 50 years and the manipulative man revealed by his journal and emails seemed like two entirely different people. Perhaps they both existed within him, the dedicated scholar and the self-serving opportunist. I called Steinman immediately to relay Thomas's offer. He listened carefully, then advised caution. "The financial terms sound reasonable on the surface," he acknowledged, "but I'd want to see the specific language of the non-disclosure agreement. These can be written with such broad restrictions that you'd essentially be unable to discuss your own life experiences with anyone." "I'm concerned about how a public dispute might affect my grandson," I admitted. "A legitimate concern, Steinman." "Agreed. But there are ways to protect family members while still ensuring you're not silenced inappropriately. Let me review the formal offer when it comes in, and we'll discuss options." Later that afternoon, I met Eleanor for our now regular coffee at her shop. When I told her about Thomas's offer and the non-disclosure requirement, she frowned. "He's still trying to control the narrative," she observed, "to ensure his reputation remains intact while you shoulder the emotional burden of secrecy." "But he's offering a fair financial settlement," I pointed out. "Isn't that progress?" "It's the bare minimum," Eleanor corrected. "He's offering what you were legally entitled to all along, what any court would award you anyway, and acting as if it's a generous concession. And in exchange, he wants to ensure his decades of emotional neglect and recent deception remain private." Put that way, the offer seemed less reasonable. "But Lucas will be fine," Eleanor assured me. "Children are resilient, and he's young enough that the specifics won't mean much to him anyway. Besides, you don't have to make this a Publix spectacle to refuse a gag order. There's middle ground." When I returned home, Jessica called to check in. She'd heard from Thomas about his visit and offer. "He's framing it as incredibly generous," she reported. "Said he's giving you everything you asked for and you're still being difficult about the non-disclosure." "What do you think?" I asked, curious about her perspective. Jessica was quiet for a moment. "I think Dad is desperate to protect his image. Not because he's ashamed of hurting you, but because he's afraid of how his colleagues will see him. She paused. I also think you shouldn't have to pretend the last few months never happened just to spare his reputation. But what about Lucas? I asked. Your father mentioned he might face gossip at school. Mom, Jessica said gently, Lucas is 7. His classmates don't care about elderly professors having affairs. And if anyone did say something, Stephen, and I would handle it appropriately. She sighed. Dad is using Lucas as emotional leverage, just like he's using everything else. After we hung up, I sat in my sunroom, watching the evening shadows stretch across the garden. The plants needed attention. I'd been too preoccupied with the divorce proceedings to tend to them properly. As I moved among them, trimming dead leaves and checking soil moisture, I reflected on Thomas's offer. The financial terms were fair, yes. But the non-disclosure agreement felt like one final attempt to silence me, to prioritize his comfort over my truth. Why should I have to pretend that 50 years of marriage had ended amicably by mutual agreement? Why should I have to lie about the pain and humiliation I'd endured? By the time I finished tending to my plants, I'd made my decision. I texted Steinman. I'll accept the financial terms of Thomas's offer, but not the non-disclosure agreement. I won't sign away my right to speak honestly about my own life. His response came quickly. A perfectly reasonable position. I'll convey this to his attorney tomorrow. That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in weeks, secure in the knowledge that I was standing firm for my dignity, even as I accepted a practical resolution to the legal battle. The next morning, I received a text from Patricia. Thomas told me about your counteroffer. He's furious, threatened to withdraw everything and take his chances in court. I told him he'd be a fool to do so with the evidence stacked against him. Not sure if he'll listen, but wanted you to be prepared. I thanked her for the warning, slightly bemused by this strange alliance between myself and the woman who had been my husband's mistress. Life certainly took unexpected turns. Steinman called mid-morning with an update. Your husband's attorney contacted me. They're accepting your terms, the financial settlement without the non-disclosure agreement. However, they're requesting a more limited confidentiality clause that would prevent specific private documents like the journal and emails from being shared publicly. But I could still speak about my experiences, I clarified. Yes, you would retain the right to discuss your marriage and divorce however you see fit, Steinman confirmed. The restriction would only apply to publishing or distributing the actual documents themselves. That seems reasonable, I agreed, relieved that Thomas had chosen a pragmatic approach rather than an emotionally reactive one. I'll finalize the paperwork immediately, Steinman said. With luck, everything could be resolved within the next 2 weeks. As I hung up, a curious lightness came over me. After weeks of turmoil, betrayal, and legal maneuvering, the end was finally in sight. Soon, I would no longer be Ellie Parker, Thomas's wife, but Eleanor Parker, a woman in her own right, with the financial security to build whatever life she chose. I texted Eleanor the news. Settlement accepted. No non-disclosure agreement, just a limited confidentiality clause about the actual documents. Freedom and financial security secured. Her response made me smile. Champagne celebration at E. The shop tonight. And time to seriously discuss that partnership offer. The partnership offer. In the chaos of the divorce proceedings, I hadn't given Eleanor's proposal the consideration it deserved. But now, with the settlement nearly finalized, I could begin to imagine a future where I wasn't defined by my relationship to Thomas. A future that included purpose, community, and possibly even a new business venture. For the first time since finding those keys in Thomas's briefcase, I felt a genuine surge of excitement about what lay ahead. The end of my marriage, painful as it was, had forced me to rediscover parts of myself that had been dormant for decades. My intelligence, my resilience, my capacity for growth and change, even at 72. Thomas had unwittingly given me a final gift, the opportunity to become the woman I might have been if I hadn't surrendered my identity to supporting his dreams. The irony wasn't lost on me, but neither was the profound sense of possibility that came with it. That evening, as Eleanor and I toasted with champagne in the back room of her bookshop, she asked the question that had been hovering between us for weeks. "So, what do you think about becoming my business partner? Ready to start a new chapter?" I raised my glass, meeting her expectant gaze with a smile. "I think it's exactly the chapter I've been waiting 50 years to write. 6 months can change everything." The divorce was finalized in early spring, bringing with it not just legal closure but a profound sense of liberation. The settlement proved even more favorable than I'd anticipated. Half of all our assets, including Thomas's pension, a substantial lump sum, and continued health coverage through his university benefits. Coffee and books transformed under our joint ownership. Eleanor's experience and my fresh perspective created something neither of us could have built alone. We expanded the cafe area, introduced evening literary events, and started a popular book delivery service for homebound seniors. The community embraced our vision, and business flourished beyond our expectations. I moved into a charming 2-bedroom condominium within walking distance of the shop, half the size of the house I'd shared with Thomas, but entirely mine, decorated, according to my tastes, filled with art and colors he would have deemed too eclectic for his academic image. My sunroom plants thrived in the bright southern exposure of my new balcony, joined by exotic varieties I'd always wanted to try growing but had been too timid to suggest. Jessica and Lucas visited regularly, my grandson delighted in helping, at the bookstore on weekend mornings, proudly wearing the small apron we'd had custom-made with Junior Bookseller embroidered across the front. Jessica seemed relieved to see me thriving, confessing once that she'd worried I might collapse. "Without Thomas as my center of gravity, I underestimated you, Mom," she admitted one afternoon as we watched Lucas arranging a children's book display. We all did. Thomas, for his part, maintained a dignified distance. We encountered each other occasionally at community events, or when he came to pick up Lucas for his designated grandparent time. Those interactions were civil but brief, marked by a careful politeness that acknowledged our shared history without dwelling on its painful conclusion. Patricia moved to Arizona, returning to the desert landscape she'd always loved. According to Jessica, who maintained occasional contact with her, she'd joined a writer's group and was working on a memoir. Thomas had apparently attempted reconciliation several times, but she remained firm in her decision to move forward independently. The irony wasn't lost on me. Both women Thomas had considered essential to his happiness had ultimately chosen to define themselves outside of his influence. Eleanor and I developed a routine of closing the shop early on Wednesdays to attend art history lectures at the community college. I discovered a passion for Renaissance painting that surprised me with its intensity. My observations during class, discussions earned respect from both professors and younger students, validating an intellectual confidence I'd never been allowed to develop in Thomas's shadow. One Wednesday evening after class, Eleanor nudged me as we walked toward our cars. "That gentleman from the ancient architecture course has been watching you for weeks. I think he's working up the courage to introduce himself." I laughed, dismissing her observation. "Don't be ridiculous. I'm 72. "Exactly," Eleanor countered with a mischievous smile. "You're 72, not dead. And you're radiant these days, Ellie." I rolled my eyes at her matchmaking, but secretly felt a flutter of something I hadn't experienced in decades. Possibility. Not necessarily for romance, but for connection beyond what I'd allowed myself to imagine after 50 years of marriage. The memoir writing workshop I joined brought unexpected healing. Putting my experiences on paper, the sacrifices, the betrayals, but also the strength I'd discovered, transformed painful memories into a narrative of resilience. My writing mentor suggested I consider publishing, but I was content simply to have reclaimed my story for myself. On the anniversary of finding Thomas's keys, I hosted a dinner party at my condominium. Jessica and Stephen, Eleanor, 2 new friends from my writing group, and the art history professor who had indeed, finally, introduced himself. We toasted not to my divorce or Thomas's absence, but to new beginnings that had seemed impossible a year earlier. Later, as guests departed and Jessica helped me with the dishes, she asked softly, "Are you happy, Mom? Truly happy?" I considered the question seriously. "I'm fulfilled," I answered finally. "I'm engaged with life in ways I'd forgotten were possible. I'm valued for my mind, my opinions, my contributions." I smiled at my daughter. "And yes, I'm genuinely happy, not in spite of losing the life I had, but because that loss forced me to create something better." That night, standing on my balcony among my thriving plants, I watched the city lights sparkle against the darkness. At 72, I had discovered an essential truth that had eluded me for decades. A life of supporting someone else's dreams can never be as fulfilling as pursuing your own, no matter how late that pursuit begins. The secret apartment that had shattered my world became, in retrospect, the doorway to my freedom. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals lead to the most profound transformations. If we have the courage to walk through the fire and emerge, reborn on the other side. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.